All right, everyone. Hello and welcome to this week's Career and Identity Intersections panel. My name is Cass. I work in the UNLV Career Services office as a career coach, newly a career and professional development specialist, but really ultimately my job boils down to being a career coach. I am joined today by four incredible panelists who's going to be discussing imposter syndrome, which is the topic for today. And before we get started, I want to just run through a couple of virtual communal agreements. So to get started, we ask all of you as participants to please mute your microphone. That will ensure that we don't pick up any of your feedback. If I notice that your microphone is not muted, I will just mute it manually myself. Turn your captions on if you want to be able to pick up all of the dialogue going on today. So if you go to the bottom of the screen of the Google Meets room, you can click on turn on closed captioning, and that'll allow you to pick up everything that the panelists are sharing today. You as participants may keep your video on or off, but our presenters, our panelists will be using both audio and video today. They have been encouraged to turn their video off at any point if they have to go do something, take a call, whatever, right? We all have work and lives that we're living. Ask your questions as participants via the chat function so that everyone can see them. So please don't unmute your microphone to ask your question. Instead, go ahead and put them in the chat box. Typically, I collect all those questions and then I use them at the end for the Q&A portion. So if your question isn't addressed, know that I've taken note of it and I'm just saving it for the end. As you may have noticed, we are recording this presentation and sharing it on the UNLV Career Services website, as well as our social media, for example, our YouTube channel. There will be a survey for today. So after the event, I'll share the survey again so that you can provide us some feedback. This session is very, very popular so far. I'm really excited to get it started. I'll quickly glaze over this part, which is related to me. So again, I already introduced myself. I'll be the moderator today. I will be muting my camera and not my audio as soon as we get started, just so you can focus on our wonderful panelists today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into our question and answers that these amazing panelists will share with us today. So we're going to get started with some panelist introductions, and we'll go ahead and start with Natalie, and Natalie will answer the two questions on the screen related to where she works, what's her role, the day-to-day, and then pass it on. Natalie, go ahead and kick us off. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Natalie Thomas. I use she, her pronouns. So I am a field manager for the Democratic Congressional Campaigns Committee, also known as the D-TRIP, because that's a super long name for somewhere to work. So field managers work with like volunteer recruitment. I also oversee a fellowship program. So my day-to-day looks like checking in with my team. I'm the regional leader in the district I work in, which is Utah 4. So currently living in Salt Lake City. But day-to-day checking in, sending out my morning memo to the fellowship program students, and then doing a training for them usually about volunteer recruitment or hard asks or whatever they need training on. And then I send a bunch of emails out, and then I call a lot of people every day to make sure that they support our candidate and get them to come volunteer with us, as well as like hosting daily volunteer events and trainings, and then checking out, making sure that my region is meeting all their goals. So that is kind of a sum up of my day-to-day looks like. It's different every day on a campaign, so that's kind of it. But I'll pass it on to Christina.
Natalie, you're doing important work, my friend. Hey guys, my name is Christina Omana, she, her pronouns, and I currently work as a merchandising analyst at Home Depot's corporate office here in Atlanta. I support the faucet business in executing merchandising strategies and initiatives. This includes, but not limited to, pricing, new items, promotions, kind of just the day-to-day support of our SSC or our store associates every day. And just staying in contact with them and supporting them in all their needs when it comes to the faucet category. So I will pass it on to Alexis.
Thank you so much, Christina. Awesome. Again, I'm Lex Wallace, pronoun she, hers. I am currently the Assistant Director for Student Leadership and Community Engagement at Mississippi State University. Fun fact, I just came from UNLV working alongside Stina Odegaard in our Service Learning and Leadership Office. So my day-to-day really includes overseeing our 16-member AmeriCorps Vista project. We have AmeriCorps Vista stationed throughout the Oktibbeha County area. We do days of service throughout the year, ongoing volunteer opportunities, which are mostly virtual at this time, and promoting that virtual volunteering piece. And then also doing our alternative break trip program as well. So having students go, not necessarily now into communities, but learning about issues and exploring issues that affect the community and what they can do about it beyond just involving with our office. Something else we do is our Center for Community Engaged Learning, where we partner with faculty members to incorporate community engagement and service within the classroom alongside their curriculum. So lots of different pieces all the time. And I'm going to pass it over to Kayla.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kayla Tenade. I use she, her pronouns. I currently serve as a Native American Program Coordinator in the Office of Student Diversity and Social Justice. So essentially my work, I supervise 2 program assistants, and my team really does help to put programs, create initiatives and resources to really help and support our Native students at UNLV. In addition, I also supervise a graduate assistant, and we both co-advise a student organization called SODA, Students Organizing Diversity Activities. And a lot of the work that they do is programming regarding diversity issues. Kind of my other day-to-day things, checking emails, checking in with students, making sure that they have the support needed throughout their journey at UNLV. So that is me.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. You folks have some really diverse experiences and a lot to share today related to the topic of imposter syndrome. So let's go ahead and just dive right in. So the first kind of topic that we want to cover is all about framework and really the framework of the imposter syndrome. Sort of what is imposter syndrome? What does it feel like for you personally? And then in what ways has imposter syndrome shown up for you? I'll go ahead and select the first person to go, but just a little bit to share on my end is I also experienced the same thing related to imposter syndrome. I'm 24 years old in a very interesting world of career and professional development in which most of my colleagues are over 10 years older than me. So I completely understand a lot of the experiences of many of you in this room, but panelists, let's go ahead and get started and really dive into your experience with imposter syndrome. And I'm going to go ahead and just tag Lex to get us started.
I knew that was coming. Thank you so much, Cassandra. So I too resonate with your statement around being a young professional in a space of older adults. I'm only 26 years old and am holding a position that is not very common for folks who are in my age category. So feelings of feeling like a fraud, or even feeling like my qualifications and skills don't match to the position itself comes up very often, specifically in instances where I am looked to as the expert on different topics or issues or things that come up. And so I think it comes up daily. There is not a moment that I don't think about, oh, you need to know all the things in this moment and be competent at all times when you are questioned. And also feeling like, oh, I don't have those answers. And so those are some initial thoughts that come to my mind when it comes to imposter syndrome for me. And I will tag in Natalie.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, imposter syndrome, just feeling like you don't really belong in a space. I'm also 24. However, I mean, political campaigning is a pretty young space. A lot of my colleagues are 18. I've worked with high school students who get really involved. So not always that feeling like, oh, I'm too young to be here, although I am used to being a very young person in a room. I went to an early college high school. So I was in grad school and I was 20 and no one else was 20. And so I've kind of felt out of place for a while, especially being a woman in politics. Even on progressive campaigns that I've worked on, there have been issues with people just not treating you like you're a competent person, and so then you start to feel like maybe you don't belong there, or even if you are treated really well, you still like second guess yourself. A lot of volunteers have a lot of opinions on how campaigns should run, despite having never been on a campaign their whole life or having only volunteered a few hours in the past year. So you constantly second guess yourself. At least I do on this campaign, which is really interesting because I do have like managerial positions, and I have before. I supervise people, and in this role, I supervise a lot of people. We have had like 40 something students from the summer and fall fellowships programs that I manage, as well as like my own organizers in the region, and then I have my own goals as well. So it just feels like a lot of things kind of pile onto that. But imposter syndrome is like knowing on a base level that you are a competent person who belongs here, but then still like not really believing that. So a lot of times I will ask myself, do I even belong in this space? Do I even deserve this job? Should I even be here? And my boss will be like, of course you do. But I'm like, I'm tricking everybody here. I don't actually belong here. I've conned everyone, and they will figure it out one day. That's what kind of feels like for me a lot of the time. So, but I'm going to pass it on to Kayla.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, a lot of kind of what you shared is, I guess, similar things that I've experienced and am experiencing. So for me, when it comes to imposter syndrome, it really is that sense of like, I'm a fraud, or I'm feeling like a fraud, right? And oftentimes for me, it's really feeling like I don't deserve my successes and accomplishments that I've done and had. I think even just being on this panel, honestly, I was like, wow, Kevin really wanted me to be a part of this panel. What? So just kind of questioning, like, do I really belong in this space? Like, am I really worthy of my work? And I know I am, right? Like, I've been able to kind of work through my own kind of negative feelings to be able to get to where I am and help to empower myself. But there's still those days where I just don't feel that I should belong in spaces, even though people have asked me to be in certain like presentations or tables. I think an example that I can share is even just attending grad school. A lot of the folks that were in my graduate program already knew each other, have had so much experience with like housing and res life and being so active on campus. Where for me, I came from, I was born and raised in Hawaii, and I went to grad school in Colorado. So it was like definitely a cultural shock. And not having that sense of community in grad school, on top of just not feeling like I belong, was really difficult to kind of navigate in that space, but also still knowing that I deserved to be there because I was accepted. And so I think overall, just knowing that I deserve to be in these spaces, really helping to empower myself to know that I deserve to be in these spaces. And so, yeah. And then I can pass this off to you, Christina.
Yeah, that's awesome. I would say, just coming from a corporate background, it can feel like you're only as good as where you went to school and who you know. And so when you feel like, you don't have, the best degree, or you went to the best schools, or, your dad wasn't this, it can feel immediately like you don't belong. And so working for a major company that people come all over the country to work at, it allows imposter syndrome to reveal itself pretty easily. You get in your head because people on your team went to bigger schools and had more access. And even being a super confident person, I feel like it's really hard not to struggle with that, because, in the beginning, I didn't think I had what it took to kind of grow my career at my company, because of like, I might not have had that access, or I might not have had that Ivy degree, or, kind of things of that nature. And so it can be really daunting going in and not knowing, am I supposed to be here? And am I a fraud? And, when I go from a next interview and I'm stacking up against people, like, they might look at them because of this school they went to versus can they do the job? And then I'm, left in the dust. So it can really be hard in a corporate setting, like where it's so dog eat dog and highly competitive, to not feel like, do I belong here in this space?
Yeah, thank you, panelists, for all of your points. I think that many young or different employees sometimes experience this level of imposter syndrome, whether it's related to age or it's related to experience and all of those things. And so I think this really sets the tone for our greater discussion today regarding imposter syndrome. So thank you for your answers, and we're going to go ahead and transition to the next set of questions. So these questions are related to experience. You can cover all of the questions. You can cover just one of them, whatever kind of sits well with you. But the questions that we'll explore right now are, how do your salient identities inform how you navigate imposter syndrome? And how is imposter syndrome discussed in your current place of work, I guess, if at all? And what practices are in place to help you feel empowered to overcome it in the workplace? And I think what's really great here is you all come from very different spaces. Two of you, yes, in higher education, but kind of working in different areas of that. And then a corporate and then kind of like a nonprofit, more public space, which is really great to hear these perspectives. So we'll go ahead and kick it off with Kayla, and you can go ahead and tack these questions.
Awesome. So for me, kind of my salient identities for me in kind of these spaces is my age. So I'm 26, and then being a woman of color. And so kind of the one experience that I think about very often, it was, I think, like a couple of days into starting this position, and kind of overhearing people talking about myself and my colleagues of, they're so young, like they shouldn't be here. Like, why are they asking so many questions? And it's like, we're just asking questions to kind of get clarification. And just because I'm young doesn't mean that I don't deserve to be here. In addition to being, I think, also a woman of color, I think there's been often many times in spaces where I'm being dismissed or spoken down to or ignored, mainly because I'm a woman of color and I'm a young person. And so for me, it's really being able for me to shift kind of that mindset to I belong here, and really being able to talk with people to share kind of my experiences and how I've navigated them. Kind of in regards to my current workplace, I think we have a really great culture where not just our professional staff, and when I mean by professional staff, I mean by like our director, assistant director, program coordinators, and our GAs, but not just with us, but also with our students. I think oftentimes our students really do feel that sense of imposter syndrome, and we talk about it very openly. So for example, we just had a student training a month ago, and students were feeling like they're experiencing imposter syndrome. So I think really being able to have those conversations with your students and with folks really helps other people know that they're not in it alone. And I think oftentimes with imposter syndrome, we feel that we're the only ones experiencing it, but that's not true, right? And I think for ways that kind of my workplace helps me feel empowered to overcome it, again, going back to just really talking about it, my supervisor, we really have conversations of when we're both experiencing it, when I'm experiencing it, how I overcome it. And we really do highlight within our office our accomplishments. And so I think in the UNLV today, y'all might have seen some familiar names from SDSJ, but really being able to highlight that not just within our office, but within the larger UNLV community. So yeah, and I'm going to pass this off to Natalie.
Thanks. Yeah, so I feel like the identities that make me feel like mostly I have imposter syndrome in my current position are definitely going to be like my gender as a woman, and then my income level. So I think it was Christina talking about, experiences with like schools and like your education status. So I went to a state school program. I chose to go, I got into other schools, but I chose a program that I went to for a lot of reasons. And I'm really proud of my degrees, but basically everyone I work with has prestigious schools and private and Ivy League degrees. Not every single person on my team, but a lot of them, which is fantastic for them, and they're good people. But there are definitely times where I feel like I'm in spaces with these people that I don't know, I feel like left out in that way, or but on the other hand, when I'm talking to my volunteers for this campaign, other campaigns I've been on in the past, most of my volunteers also don't have Ivy League degrees, and so I feel like I relate very differently to them than some of my coworkers would and do, just because I don't come from that like coastal elite kind of background that a lot of people are framed in politics as being from. So especially because I currently work in a more conservative district, and I used to work in Texas, which is where I lived before this. So also a pretty conservative area. So I feel like I was able to relate better to people who didn't also have those backgrounds. And then, you know, in my current workplace, I have a great relationship with my supervisor. I always have on all my campaigns. I've been really lucky to have really great bosses who believe in me and support me. But there are still times where I feel like I don't belong, and because of those backgrounds. And so, I mean, even on I worked on Elizabeth Warren's campaign before this, and even on that campaign, there were still issues in Nevada with male leadership treating women poorly. If you watched the news at that time, which was disappointing to see. And so there's still pushback going on from leadership who treat women poorly on all campaigns, even in progressive groups and nonprofits, as well as poor treatment of people who are lower income. I know one of my friends she was interviewing for a progressive organization, and it's like nonpartisan, but they were leaning progressive. And they like straight up asked her why they should hire her over someone who went to Harvard. The other applicants went to Harvard and Princeton, and you went to some school in Texas. Why should we bring you on our team? So that's something that's still an attitude that happens a lot in politics, especially because so many groups are based in New York and DC, which are very expensive cities to live in. I know I interviewed for a job one time, and they were like, the max salary is $34K a year. You have to live in Manhattan or DC or LA, which is like, and you'll work 60 hours a week minimum. Because I work 60 hours a week now, and that's very hard to do. And to work 60 to 90 hours a week on that salary and have to live in some of the most expensive cities in the world is not feasible. So these jobs are not accessible to people who don't have a lot of money or come from a background with a lot of money. And so coming from a low income background makes being in politics a little harder in that way, as well as like my campaign pays our interns, which is great. A lot of places do not pay their interns, which makes it very accessible for people who can't afford to work for free for a semester for 40 hours a week. And so I try to like be a better example, and the campaign I currently work on, and make sure that people are being treated really well, that we bring people in from different backgrounds. And so I've had really a good support system in my manager being great and empowering me to like step up and be a leader and giving me more responsibilities and letting me kind of take ownership over a fellowship program, and making sure we have people from different backgrounds who don't typically get to have jobs in politics joining this campaign. So it's very interesting to have this like Utah 4 race for Congress, which is like not a state people really care about all the time, especially the Democratic Party. There's not a lot of Democrats in Utah. And like to have a staff that is diverse in like gender and age and race and educational background. So I've been really empowered to like kind of make a difference in my space now, which kind of helps alleviate that. And I'm going to pass it on to Alexis.
Thank you, Natalie. I'm going to be a little brief because I believe y'all summed up a lot of my points for that. Speaking to my salient identities, I think Kayla talked about this too, as a woman of color, in particular in spaces. There are a lot of feelings that come up around, one, having to code switch and be careful about how I'm navigating spaces, not only for my own protection, but also to be seen as the knowledgeable person in the room and being able to have answers when called upon. And so that is something that I feel like I have to navigate often. And something else that comes up that's invisible, that's a salient identity, is my values, my value set, which is a part of my identity. And figuring out, even though I am from Mississippi, a lot of my value sets differ from the Bible Belt and the Red State and different things like that. And so having to navigate that institutionally as well has become a huge part of imposter syndrome, because one, that feeling of belongingness, it doesn't exist when a lot of my value sets differentiate from what my institution is doing. In the workplace, what I will say is I have a very unique situation that I don't think a lot of people get to experience. I actually am a colleague with another assistant director, as well as my boss, who's the director, who also holds the Black woman identity. And so being able to have that solidarity and community and being able to talk about that openly, because I feel like very often people who share similar identities in a predominant space that is of their counterpart don't always often see that as community or see there as an opportunity for solidarity, but more so competition. And I'm very thankful that we don't have that culture in my workplace. So I think that's also something to be aware of, even as a student looking into the career field, or even as acting professionals who are in career fields, is something to pay attention to as well, because imposter syndrome can rear its head that way as well. And I'll pass that over to Christina.
Lexi, you're a woman of my own heart, because I completely agree with so many of those points, man. Being a Black woman in corporate America can be draining, and it can be tough because there is an absolute lack of visibility of somebody that looks like you in spaces of, you know, leadership. And not only you might see somebody who looks like you in leadership, but it's very few. And it feels sometimes like there's a tokenism aspect of it, right? So it can be tough. And, you know, navigating that as a Black woman, you're constantly wanting to make sure that, you know, am I getting those roles? Because they need to, you know, have somebody that looks like me in that space, have a number, you know what I mean? And like, for example, I'm looking into a role right now, and I'm networking, and I'm, you know, reaching out to those people in the roles that are people that are in that role currently, and managers. And I realize that they have no Black men or women in that organization, in that part of the company. And I would be the only one. So navigating that, it can be tough when you want to go somewhere, but you see nobody else has kind of wrecked that path for you, you know? But I'd say working, you know, as a Black woman, I find that I'm most comfortable and confident when I'm able to find Black people and women at work and grow that relationship aspect that Lex was talking about, because, you know, you can create that safe space and have identities represented and be able to vent when needed. And, you know, they can co-sign like, no, girl, you're awesome, you know? And whether that be coworkers or mentors or people I network with, you feel less like an imposter when you see people who look like you, right? And so I'd say right now in my current place of work, I think there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of awards and recognition. And I think that does a really good job of validating you and validating your work, because if you're getting awarded, if your manager is constantly calling your name out, you feel less like an imposter and more like, I'm doing this and I belong here and I'm doing a damn good job.
Thank you. I think those are really good points, right? Some of you talked about how you have coworkers and colleagues that share that same lived experience. So it becomes a little bit easier, right, to navigate both your salient identity, but also this whole imposter syndrome situation versus others, right? Some of you shared that you don't really see people like you in your community or your space. And that's where it becomes important to find colleagues in maybe different spaces who share that experience. So if you get anything at all from this as participants, I think these 4 women are really great examples of people to connect with, to share that experience. If you're currently experiencing imposter syndrome, or you do in the future. Let's move over to our last set of questions and before the Q&A. And this is related to coping and support. So this is all about the recommendations and the advice and what we can offer, right, our participants today. So the first question will be, what recommendations do you have for coping with imposter syndrome? And then, are there mentors or folks within or outside of your identity groups that have been helpful in addressing imposter syndrome for you? And we'll go ahead and kick this one off with Christina.
Thank you. So recommendations. All right. So there's it's tough, guys. So remember that others' greatness and how seemingly easy it is for them doesn't diminish your greatness or your journey, right? Like that's first. Facts over feelings. Remember that you you landed the job, you got the call, you were the leader on the project, you got the promotion. Like no amount of feelings that you might have in that moment take away those facts, right? So that's my first and foremost recommendation when it comes to imposter syndrome. And when it comes to coping methods, you use whatever coping method makes you feel better whenever you're feeling low, right? So that might be therapy, that might be self-care, verbal affirmations, journaling, whatever helps you in that moment, get out of that headspace, right? And I'd say absolutely there are folks within and outside of my, identity group that have been instrumental in, creating that confidence in myself and always saying to me like, hey, you're killing it. You're doing a great job. Nobody can take away the fact that you are 24 and doing this really, competitive and high stress role. Nobody can take away the fact that, you got this degree, that you're about to get your MBA. Like nobody can take that away from you. And having people in your life that can co-sign that is so absolutely important. I understand that finding a good mentor can be hard when you don't know where you want to go necessarily in your career, but just having people in general in your life that are constantly supporting you and rooting for you is absolutely important. So please, first and foremost, do that for yourself. Oh, I'm gonna pass. I'm gonna pass it over to Kayla.
Thank you for sharing. I want to say for me, when it comes to kind of recommendations with coping with imposter syndrome, I think really just naming it and knowing what that looks like for you. So obviously that can look different for everyone, but for me, it's maybe entering a space and I'm like, oh, should I even be here? Should I not? But then being able to kind of flip that, and I know it seems very like positive, and that's kind of how my mind works, kind of like this positive, realistic kind of view of things. But really being able to shift that mindset of like, no, I really do belong here, right? Like I have my friends, my support systems, a lot of people telling me that this is a space that I do belong in, right? I think talking about it with people, kind of going back to what I had mentioned earlier, and kind of sharing kind of those experiences, both positive and negative. I think another way for me is really to name my accomplishments and really being able to celebrate those. And even if that means like, going for a walk or baking, right? Like anything that kind of helps you celebrate the ways that you want to be celebrated. Another big thing I think for me too is really being able to frame my failures as learning opportunities. I know that there's going to be times where I might not have done the best job at something, right? Or maybe like I messed up on a project and it trickled down to something else, right? Or maybe an event that I planned only had like one participant, right? Being able to kind of shift those failures and reframe them as learning opportunities to think, what are some areas that I could do better in the future to kind of help this event, project, and myself be and do better? And so those are kind of, for me, the recommendations that I have. And I think also just learning your own love language, right? I think that comes with kind of the celebrating part of it. And I know Christina, you'd mentioned like therapy. Therapy is great. I think we should really start breaking down the stigma of therapy and mental health, and really doing whatever it looks best for you. And then in regards to kind of like mentors and folks, I don't necessarily have mentors because I'm still trying to figure that piece out, to be very transparent and honest. But I do have friends, colleagues, my current supervisor, my past supervisor, who have really been helpful in kind of talking me through my imposter syndrome, kind of having them share experiences when they've experienced imposter syndrome and how they've been able to kind of overcome it and manage it. I think for me, I'm a firm believer that people don't overcome it completely, and that imposter syndrome can still show up in kind of various ways, despite your age, despite where you're at in life. And I really think it is just a matter of like knowing what that is and what that looks like for you, and finding kind of those ways to help you kind of manage through it. So yeah, I'm going to pass this to Lex.
Thank you, Kayla. I am loving a lot of what you all are saying, and also taking notes on my end, because there are so many pieces y'all mentioned around like fact over feeling and learning your love language for yourself, because self-love is important too. And also talking about the longevity piece around learning. This is not something where, oh, I've reached the goal of imposter syndrome no longer exists for me, because I promise there will be transitions, positions you take on, different roles and identities that tack on to you throughout your lifetime where it may show up again. And so I will say for me, I'm going to flip the questions just for a moment here. So in regards to mentors or folks within or outside of my identity groups, I think very often I have identified mentors where I've reached out to them and I said, hey, I would really like for you to help me through this process because we have similar experiences here. But very often I meet a lot of mentors my age, higher, or even younger than me that I am constantly learning from inherently without it being overtly said, that really helped me through that imposter syndrome as well. And I will say my imposter syndrome comes from a lack of confidence. I thought that, this is something that I only experience and nobody else around me is experiencing this. They know what they're doing. And that's simply not true. If you go to YouTube and you look up a video that, says, hey, how do you become more confident? You may see millions of views where folks have looked and to see how to also acquire those skill sets. And I think something that I would recommend, I will say this is subjective, however you do address your own imposter syndrome. But something that has worked for me is reflection and constant affirmation. So believing that you are valuable, believing that you're capable, and it's not the universe. I think Kayla and I have talked about this before. It's not just the universe working out in your favor. You did the work. You got you where you are. And constantly telling yourself that it's hard because the believing piece is important. And then something else is only focusing on what you can control and how you respond to challenges. I think somebody mentioned failure, and understanding that failure doesn't necessarily equate to not having a talent or skill set. It just means that maybe you need to practice a little more, or maybe you need to hone that skill. And failing is inevitable. Nobody's perfect. I would love to meet a perfect person to see how to deal with life, but that has yet to happen. And so those are some of my thoughts around that. And Natalie, I'm going to hush and I'm going to let you take the floor.
All right, thank you. So I'll keep it also brief since my friends had really great recommendations earlier. I'll just recommend really quickly, I read the Ask a Manager blog a lot. If you aren't currently reading that, you should all read it. It's really great advice for managing and for working in a new place and finding a new job, but also there's a lot of workplace drama people write about, which is fun. And then also I think Kayla mentioned love languages. So if you know what love languages are between you and your partner, there's also kind of love language for work. It's called workplace affirmations. The same people made it. You should pay for the workplace test, but you can also just read the examples and then pick which one you think applies best to you for free. So I asked my supervisor if we could do that for work one day, since we're about to, election day is less than 6 weeks away. So I'm about to work every day. I have 1 day off a week right now. On election day, I'll have worked 44 days straight for 10 hours a day minimum, which is awful. And so I was like, can we do this workplace affirmations thing so that we can know how to treat people better on our staff in these last few weeks where it's insane. And she's like, of course. So, working out with your team so that everyone can feel affirmed, so we all different, way feels better. So my love language with my partner is acts of service, but with my workplace, it's words of affirmation. So being told I'm doing a really good job, that people are noticing the work I'm putting in. So my coworkers, physical touch in workplace will look like a high five, although you can't really high five right now because of COVID. Which on my test back today was negative, so that was good. And then there's acts of service in a workplace would be helping someone with a project. So learning how people feel affirmed in a workplace so you can make your staff feel better and that your boss and your coworkers know how to make you feel appreciated in the workplace, I think has been really helpful. Until we started implementing that in my job, it's been a lot better. We also do weekly, we call it throw glitter, not shade, where you throw glitter at someone who's doing really well and compliment them, so everyone knows like what you're doing, and you can like feel like you're doing a good job. Because like all jobs are really hard, and campaign jobs are really, really hard. And then finding mentors. I used to work in higher education. My boss from that position is still talking to him sometimes. He's doing great. He helps me a lot with feeling like I belong in certain places. And I have, friends who work on campaigns that are also women, and we have like a monthly, we haven't had it lately because like we're all on campaigns and it's wild, but we used to do like a monthly like happy hour as like women in campaigning, and we would just talk about like what we're experiencing and kind of like venting about people we work with and what's going on in our lives and our campaigns. And so that was also really helpful to like know you're not alone feeling this way, and to have other people affirming you like you're a competent person and you belong here. So finding people in those identity groups, I think that that look like you and have that same background as you are really helpful to make you like remind yourself that you belong there. So like knowing like what makes you feel better at work. So that's that.
I hope everyone is taking notes. This is gold. I certainly am taking notes. I know Lex is taking notes there for a little bit. And each time, even though you recapped the person before, you still added something personal, right, to the experience. And it just shows that imposter syndrome is something that everyone experiences. So, remember as participants, if you don't take anything else away, take what you just heard for the last 10 minutes or so. Reflect, give yourself those constant reminders and affirmations that you are doing a good job. Also remember to learn your own love languages and share those with the people you work with, right? That's super important. Practice self-care, and then just celebrate the successes of not only yourself, but your colleagues, and hopefully it'll continue to kind of be cyclical and you can all celebrate each other. So thank you, participants and panelists, for engaging so far in this discussion. We're going to transition into our Q&A portion of this event. So I already have gathered 2 questions so far throughout, but now is a really great time for you as participants to go ahead and drop some of your questions that you may have. If you have specific questions for specific panelists, just be like, Lex, I have a question for you, and I'll read these aloud and all of that. But while you maybe think of some of the questions that you're having, I'll ask the first 2 that have already been dropped in the chat. So the first one happened a little bit of time ago, but the question was, what about having imposter syndrome when an older person is working with younger people at the same level? Does anyone want to try to take a stab at that? You don't all have to, by the way. It can just be kind of like, oh, 2 of us want to say something. So when we're done, you all can just like throw up your hands in an X and be like, we're good.
I'll try and jump in here just because I know I am young, but in campaigning, I am like ancient. So 24 is considered old for older for my job. If you're like, I have a coworker like in his 30s, and like, we're all like, wow, you're really like, what was it like back then? And so, because campaigning has evolved so quickly, I work with people who have my same job title and they're like 18 or 21. And we're all like, it's a very young field. So I feel bad answering this question because I'm not like an actual older person in most workplaces in a typical way, but I am older compared to a lot of people in my field. And sometimes people who are like the 19-year-olds like make jabs at me for like, we have the same job, I'm 19. I'm like, okay, well, I used to work in other fields before this. So I think just reminding yourself that you have really good perspectives and backgrounds that they don't have. So it's very weird in campaigning to have worked in places that are not campaigns. Most people just jumped on their first campaign at like 18 and got in. And I was on a campaign at 17, and I left campaigning to go into higher ed and school. And then I worked in a corporate office, and then came back to campaigns. And I have colleagues who at other campaigns who've been in their 30s and had kids and had the same job as me. So just reminding yourself that like you have really good experiences, and like you're not like a failure for being in this position with them. They had different life path than you did, but you still have really good background that is important to your workplace, that your workplace will value. If they didn't value it, you wouldn't be there. And so reminding yourself that you do belong there, that you have experiences that those people don't have, and they can learn from you, and they can also learn from them. So that's how I would navigate that kind of space.
I think that's really great commentary. Anything else that the 3 of you want to add? We can just shake our head no if it's a no. That's totally fine. We can transition. Lex?
I will add just one thing onto that. I work with a variety of folks in my workplace when it comes to the topic of age itself or the identity of age. I actually supervise a much older adult directly in our office. My coordinator is much older than me. They're working on their PhD. And then I have graduate assistants who are younger than I am. And so I think also being able to recognize or assess, is my imposter syndrome coming from a genuine place of, I know this knowledge, but I still don't feel confident? Or is it coming from a place of, maybe I don't know this knowledge base and it's not my knowledge base, and I should seek that from my colleagues who are around me. And knowing that it's okay to not know everything, and even learn from folks who are in those varied age groups. And they will do the same from you. I feel like if there is a culture, that can be reciprocal. And also being comfortable with saying that you don't know, but I promise I will figure out and get back to you. That is a statement that I have had to come to terms with a lot. And know that that's okay. Well, I'll say in a space like this, it may be different in corporate America and different things like that. But I just wanted to add that little tidbit on there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great point. Age is a huge factor in this, whether it's because maybe you feel a little bit older than the other folks that you work with, or you feel younger. And so I think I appreciate both sides of that story as it relates to imposter syndrome. So we'll go ahead and transfer on to the next, or transition on to the next question, which is a little bit longer, so I'm going to read it. Have there been times where your direct peers have questioned how you got to the position you're at? And if so, how have you coped with that? A little background for this question is I've been told before by my own peers that I didn't deserve to get into the universities I got into, though I was an exemplary high school student. It really hurt my relationships with them and made it hard for me to accept my own accomplishments at the time. So panelists, do you want to share anything related to peers' perception of where you're at, and maybe anything that they've shared that you didn't really appreciate and how you kind of handled that or coped with it? I feel like we're all trying to kind of think on that. I'm waiting just for somebody's mic to kind of unmute. But, I think for me, I get this a lot, actually. I was in a master's of higher education program, and I was in a full-time job, and a lot of my classmates were just in a graduate assistantship, or they weren't working at the time. And I got a lot of backlash for how are you a career counselor? You're in your master's program just like me. You don't deserve that. You got it because of somebody you knew, and those types of things. And I think it just really goes back to a lot of the information that you as panelists shared today is, being able to cope by using, self-care, knowing your own love language, and really just being a constant affirmation for yourself, and just reminding yourself, right, that you are where you are because you should be there. But I would love to hear the perspective of any of you if you want to add anything to that. I think it's definitely challenging when your peers come at you that way, for sure.
I want to also recognize that I am taking a lot of space at this time, so I do apologize for that, y'all. But that question hit me at a core a bit, just because I think that is a really good moment to filter and vet your networking group as well, because anyone who does not approve of you winning should not be included in your support circle. And that's something to assess depending on relationships, longevity, however you want to do that. But like you said, those feelings of not feeling like, oh, you don't deserve this because we're literally at the same level. You do. And anyone who would say that, I don't think deserves your time, your energy, your effort. And so I think that would be a time to assess and vet your networking group or your friendship group or community, however you use that language, and recognize that you do deserve those things. But also know that that doesn't take away from the initial jolt feeling of what they said. And even having that conversation with them too is something I would openly suggest, because I don't think we talk about that often enough, because very frequently when people say things like that, it's not coming from a place of you winning. It's coming from a place of them feeling like they've lost. And so I those are my suggestions for that. But I would love to hear what other panelists have to say about that.
I'm looking at all your microphones. Kayla, Natalie, Christina, anything to add? We do have another question to explore as well. So, all right. I'm seeing some head nods. So we'll just transition to the next question. This is the final question that I've received in the chat, but we have 10 more minutes, participants. So if there's anything else that you want to ask our panelists, we have 10 minutes left. So the last question that I received was, how have you coped with imposter syndrome during the job search, application, and or rejection process? This one's fun. So enjoy that one, and I'll definitely add in my 2 cents towards the end. So anyone want to try to attack that first?
Yeah, so wow, I'm gonna sit with that one a little bit. So I don't know if you guys know this, but like when I first started looking at roles out, like once I graduated college, they take forever. Like the application process is long. For my job I have currently, there was like 4 parts to it. I talked to like 4 different people. I had case studies. Like it is intense. And in between each of those like 4 meetings are like weeks of you just sitting with yourself and wondering like, oh my God, did they cut me? Am I cut yet? Did I get the job? Did I not get the job? And it can just really put a damper on you with that like monster in your head saying, I did awful in that first part, so I know I didn't get to the second part. And you can immediately feel like they didn't want me because of this, that, and this, you know? And so I would say with imposter syndrome, when you're going through the application, understand that that's not a reflection of you, right? Like first and foremost, I think at the end of the day, imposter syndrome, it is very much an internal fight, right? Because you need to be thinking like, that has nothing to do with me. That who knows who was, you know, also looking for that role? Who knows if it wasn't, they went with somebody internal? You know, who knows if it's because this person applied 1 week earlier than you did, you know? So I think that you have to understand that there are external factors when it comes to the application process, and that has nothing to do with you. And that does not diminish your accomplishments and, you know, the job that you will end up getting, right? Because everything happens for a reason. In my belief, everything happens for a reason. So please, you know, take the care you need, especially if applying to jobs is draining and it can be a lot on a person. So please, while it is important that we need to have a job, we need to have a source of income, please take the time and, you know, do things for yourself in that process, right? Again, I can't emphasize enough that self-care is so important, because it can be draining and it can be disheartening to see another, you know, like email comment saying you didn't get it, right? So please just take the space, but understand that that has nothing to do with you and you can't do anything, and that's out of your control.
Something I was told when I was applying to jobs, and I've applied to a lot of jobs is that the rejection's never about you. The employer is never personally like, I hate Natalie's, I'm not going to hire her. It's just that there was and never that you're even a bad applicant or a bad person. It's just like, there was someone else who fit better. There was someone else who had maybe an extra qualification. And so that is always going to be about the other person, and never like that you personally are trash and shouldn't be here. And also when you're applying to stuff, like I think there's a lot of women on this call, like women typically don't apply to jobs unless they meet all the qualifications, and men will usually apply if they meet like half of them. Like that's like statistically, like there's research on that. So like my boyfriend has to constantly remind me when I'm applying to stuff, like just go ahead and apply to it. I'll be like, should I apply to this? I don't meet this requirement for whatever. And he's like, I would apply to that job. You should apply to that job. So having people who remind you of those things, because even though I know this is a fact, I also like emotionally like forget it. If you even meet like half the qualifications, if you think you'd be good at that job and it's like realistic that you could do that job really well, apply for it, because a job application is not like, or job description is not like hard. These have to happen. It's like a laundry list of like, it would be cool if that applicant had all these qualifications, but there's not a single person usually who's going to meet every single one on a job description. They're usually like it would be ideal if you had all these qualifications. Unless it's like something you need a certification or like to be like licensed in the state to do, you can basically always apply. Unless it's like a social work job, you have to be licensed by the state and you're not licensed by the state. Don't do that. But for most positions, if you meet like half of the qualifications, go ahead, put your name in the ring, put your hat in the ring, and see what happens. Because you could be interviewing really well. You don't know like what they prefer. You're taking power away from the employer to choose whether or not you qualify when you don't apply. So go ahead and do that and let them decide that and let have that power.
I'm hearing my career coaching skills and thoughts on repeat right now. I mean, this is exactly what I do in my job is, right, I try to motivate through these different barriers, especially if you're experiencing the imposter syndrome through your application process. So I think everything that each of you said was completely valid and totally in line with what we say. I was kind of adding some comments in there. But we have about 4 minutes left. So what I want to do now is make sure that all of our participants can reach you if you want to be reachable. So now is a really, really great time to add in anything that you want participants to be able to contact you at, whether it's an email or your LinkedIn profile, or maybe you have a website that you have for yourself. If you'd like to share that, panelists, we would love to see those things dropped into the chat. In addition, participants, if you need to reach Career Services or SCSJ, which is our Student Diversity and Social Justice Office, the contact information is right here on the screen. And really with this last 5 minutes, I'm going to drop the link to the survey, but I would love it if you could all just say some closing remarks as our panelists, any like bit of advice, something that maybe you want to just leave lasting there in the abyss, and then we'll close off at 2 p.m. So any of you can start and then just pass it off until each of you have said whatever that is. Do your mic drop, and then we'll close out for today. I feel like I have to call. Oh my gosh, Kayla, thank you for volunteering.
So I kind of also want to add to that question, kind of echoing what Christina and Natalie said. Another way that I cope is by crying. And honestly, crying does feel super amazing. And I think oftentimes people see crying as a weakness, but I truly do not see that. And I think another thing to also add to that, I firmly believe that you are where you're meant to be. And so if something didn't work out and you didn't get this job or this application or whatever it may be, I think there's something, for me, it means that there's something out there that's meant for you, something greater that's out there for you. So just kind of those things to keep in mind. And to end it, you all are amazing people. You all deserve to be in your roles, in your positions, and everything that you are in because of the hard work that you've done and the accomplishments and achievements that you've done, right? So remember, learn your love language, constantly affirm yourself, know that you are not alone, and that there are many people experiencing imposter syndrome, as you can see based on this call. And then I can share to Lex.
Thank you, Kayla. I echo all of that. I think us being in this space together today is even the first step of acknowledging that it exists, that it happens. I had my counseling session this week, and it was super helpful. And something she said was that what you are experiencing now is temporary, but that does not negate any difficulties that may come later. But always acknowledge that this moment, there may be a moment where you feel overwhelmed. You may feel not empowered. You may feel defeated, but know that that is temporary and utilize some of those recommendations that have been discussed here, and acknowledge your greatness, acknowledge the crown that you so gracefully can pick up and put back on at any time. And so I appreciate y'all's time today. And thank you so much to the panelists as well, to Cassandra as well, for having us in this space together.
Yeah, I'll just end with, you know, I don't think imposter syndrome ever really goes away. I think if you are someone who has it, you're going to have it and deal with it probably forever. You could be like president of the United States and you might still feel like I don't belong here. But no matter what you are doing, whether it's a school program or a career path, or you run for office one day and I work for you, if you are elected or chosen or admitted, like you belong there. People chose for you to be there. Employers don't just hire people they don't believe in for the fun of it. Schools don't just admit students they don't think will do well for the fun of it. So if you are in the space, you belong in that space and you deserve to be appreciated, and people should learn from you, and you deserve to have a space to speak your mind and share your experiences, and people should look up to you in that area. So if anyone ever tries to make you feel like you don't belong in a classroom or a work or a job, like, don't be their friend if they're trying to make you feel less than, and just know that you do belong there. And if you ever have issues with imposter syndrome, I guarantee you most people in your workplace also deal with that, especially if they are from marginalized backgrounds. So make those connections and just know like you do belong there. And you should feel like you belong in a space. So I kind of ramble on that, and it makes sense. But I hope that made sense overall. So yeah, that's what I'll end with.
No, yeah, I will end with just affirmations. You matter, you belong, you have the tools to be successful right here, right now. So go out and do it. If you don't see somebody that looks like you, go and pave that way. You know, constantly work on yourself, because what you work on yourself, that's what you put out into the world. So continue to work on yourself, but understand that you belong, you matter, and you have every right to be here, to work in this space, and to do awesome things in this world. So please continue to do that. And thank you guys so much. Really appreciated the time to talk with you guys, for sure.
Mic drop. That was so good. Thank you to the four of you for joining us today. This has been truly amazing, inspiring, and I feel like I've built a community just in this hour conversation. So a special thank you. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now. This will be posted onto our YouTube